This episode contains explicit content, including profanity and depictions of violence and murder. Listener discretion is advised.
Good evening and welcome back to Friday Night Fiction and part 3 of our story, Dead Cold Drop. If the previous episode of this story has slipped through your ears, I heartily suggest you tiptoe back and eavesdrop. Otherwise, tonight's revelations of the adventures of Bismarck's own Doug Rolfstad, his daughter Mandy, and Cowboy the Cat may catch you quite off guard. Now, let's return to the story and see how a city terrorized by murder might collide with our mild-mannered plumber turned gunslinger, Mr. Doug Rolfstad. Chapter 12. 10 minutes later, he pulled into the Kmart parking lot and parked far from other vehicles. He killed the engine and sat in silence, the only illumination in the cab trickling in from the parking lot lights atop tall poles. He let out a long breath and ran his fingers through his hair. He unzipped his coveralls and pulled out the envelope. He rolled it over in his hands a couple of times, twirling it from opposite corners, studying its construction and Mandy's address written in the corner. Who was behind it all? Who put the money inside? Who wrote Mandy's address in the corner? Who are these people? Shaking his head, he dropped it on top of the pistol, then fished out a coin from the cup holder. From his wallet, he extracted a scrap of paper, a corner ripped from Mandy's placemat at the diner. Before parting that morning, she'd jotted down the phone number where she was staying in Valley City. "Maybe don't share this number with anyone," she said. "Not even the lawyer. I don't want anyone knowing where I am." As he crossed the parking lot towards the payphones, he counted no fewer than 4 Ford Tauruses. "Hello?" a man's voice answered. "Is Mandy there? This is her dad." A moment later, Mandy was on the line, her voice quiet and guarded. "Hello?" Doug pictured Mandy sitting in the same PJs since Wednesday, fear etched around her eyes. "Hi, I fed Cowboy," he said. "Jesus, Dad, you went to the house? I thought you were going to call a lawyer." "I did," Doug said, turning from the payphone and scanning the parking lot. "I got a meeting set up for Sunday afternoon, but I just wanted to make sure everything was all right at your place." He forced a lighter tone than he felt. "Place was empty. Everything's fine. Got Cowboy all fed. He's fine too." A tense silence crackled on the line. "What about that thing?" Mandy said. "I have the envelope, safe and sound." "So, do I need to come to Bismarck Sunday to meet the lawyer?" Doug explained his plan. He would meet with the lawyer first. To begin with, he wouldn't even mention Mandy's name. He'd explain the whole thing and make sure they weren't making any mistakes. Only when he was sure this was the right thing to do would Mandy become involved. "Thanks, Dad," she said. "So everything looked normal at my place?" Yeah, he said. Then, "Hey, you know any friends or maybe neighbors who drive an old Ford Taurus? Dark, pretty rusty?" "I mean, I could probably name like 10 people with a car like that. Why, did something happen?" "Nah, just curious," Doug said, "trying to make sure I can place vehicles I'm keeping an eye on." He changed the subject. "So how you holding up?" "I'm okay. I feel safe here, but Dad, I'm worried about you. We had a plan. I don't like you changing it like that. I just watched the news and they still haven't caught those psychopaths. You need to be careful." Doug tensed up as he watched what looked like another Ford Taurus pulling into the Kmart parking lot. His hand went to his pocket, but he'd left the gun in the truck. "I'm being careful," he said, as his eyes followed the Taurus. "I better get going. I'll call you soon." He hit the McDonald's drive-thru and doubled up on his usual order. Back at home, he headed to the garage and tugged back the heavy tarp draped over the Chris Craft boat. At the bow, he lifted the hinged deck hatch beneath the padded seat. He slid the manila envelope deep into the compartment, wedging it up against the fiberglass lining. Then he snapped the hatch firmly shut. He tugged the canvas tarp back into its place. He grabbed his food and the bottle of wild turkey, kicked off his boots, and plopped into his living room recliner. He flipped on the TV. The local news anchor droned on about a highway pileup just outside of Fargo, but Doug barely listened, his stomach growling. He tore into the McDonald's bag like a man starved, unwrapping the first Big Mac and taking a massive bite. Grease dripped down his hand, but he paid no mind. He chased it almost frantically with a claw full of French fries, then gulped down a third of his Coke. The icy sweetness felt cool in his dry core. He grabbed the wild turkey from the side table and topped off his cup of Coke. As the whiskey swirled with the soda, Doug bit into his burger again. The food was helping. He felt relieved somehow already. If this hadn't been the most nerve-wracking day of his life. Suddenly, his whole body tensed up and he stopped chewing. He grabbed the remote and turned up the volume. Bismarck police say the victim met a horrific death unlike anything the city has ever seen. Doug swallowed. The burger went down hard and reckless. He coughed and washed it down with the drink. The words gruesome and torture flashed on screen, alongside a shot of a snow-covered park and a picnic shelter sectioned off with police tape. If investigators have any leads, they're keeping that information for themselves. Meanwhile, residents of Bismarck are in shock and living in terror. The segment cut to street interviews with Bismarck residents. They were keeping their kids home now. They were terrified, living in fear. They never thought something like this could ever happen here. Doug watched to the end, then muted the TV again while sports and weather flickered on the screen. When the food and the Coke were gone, Doug drank straight whiskey. At 10 p.m., he weaved down the hall to his bedroom, where he undressed and fell into bed. He slid the pistol under his pillow, closed his heavy eyes, and fell asleep immediately. Chapter 13. In his dream, he was back in Korea trying to steer an army jeep along a dirt road littered with invisible landmines. Doreen sat next to him, cradling Mandy, still a baby. The edge of a jungle awaited on the horizon. The jeep jerked along by itself, defying Doug's commands, the steering wheel in his grip disconnected and spinning freely without resistance. Each time a front wheel struck an exposed tree root, a pothole, or a stone, Doug braced himself for a blast, but it never came. The little jeep just bumped the Rolfstad family in new directions. Doug wrestled with the steering wheel in a panic, half blinded by the salty sting of sweat seeping into his eyes. Doreen did not speak and seemed unconcerned. She just sat silently holding their baby, looking out over the flat landscape in front of them and at the trees and vegetation in the distance. He woke with a jolt, his heart pounding in his chest. He was covered in sweat, the sheets soaked through. The red glare of the clock on his nightstand read 2:43 a.m. He lay still in the darkness, replaying the day's whirlwind, the icy drive to Valley City, Mandy's quivering voice, the image of Alec's mutilated body hanging from a rope, the lone figure in the Taurus, and that manila envelope stuffed with the old bills. Then, just like that, he sat up, throwing off the covers. "I bet that's it," he said, out loud. He stood up a little too quickly, the wild turkey still having some kind of say. He threw on his jeans and a t-shirt, then strode down the hall towards the kitchen with purposeful steps. "That's gotta be it," he repeated, louder this time. He marched straight through the kitchen, slipped on his Crocs by the door, then burst out into the garage. The fluorescent bulbs buzzed to life, bathing the wide garage with their cold, sterile glow. At the bow of the Chris Craft, he yanked back the tarp, lifted the deck hatch, and plucked the manila envelope from the locker. Holding it up under the cool light, he squinted at the address scrawled in the corner. His breath hitched as he leaned closer. "You gotta be kidding me." His eyes squinted further. He turned and scanned the garage. His gaze settled on the workbench, random tools, fishing gear. Aha! He marched to the bench and grabbed a small magnifying glass hanging beside his lures and fly tying kit. Then, with the magnifying glass in one hand and the envelope in the other, he strode back into the house. In the kitchen, Doug turned on the overhead light and sat down at the table. He poured out the contents of the envelope, 5 stacks of $100 bills. He brushed them aside with his arm, then flattened the envelope on the table surface. With steady hands, he positioned the magnifying glass over the address, adjusting the angle until the letters and numbers came into sharp focus. His heart thudded as he leaned closer. He focused again. The second number 1 in 11th wasn't a 1 at all. "That's a goddamn 7, he gasped. He moved the glass out of focus, blinked his eyes twice, then took a new look, focusing carefully. The faint tail of the character stretched downward, just enough to mark it unmistakably now as a 7. "You dumbass drug addicts," Doug barked. "That's a goddamn 7. This says 17th Street, not 11th. Doug's pulse kicked into overdrive. He lowered the package and stared straight ahead as if he could peer right through the walls of his home like Superman, scanning all of Bismarck and every imaginable seedy street and back alley, wherever criminals and dirtbags like this lived or gathered or shot junk into their veins. "You idiots!" he barked, his voice ricocheting off the walls. "You delivered it to the wrong house." Then, all at once, the absurdity of it struck him, and he started laughing. Hard, loud, uncontrollable laughter that made his chest ache. It was the kind of laugh born from sheer disbelief, the kind that bubbled up when the stress of everything boiled over all at once. Slowly, though, the laughter ebbed away and left Doug Rolfstad sitting alone with his thoughts, and a type of somber silence moved in. He leaned back in his chair, still gripping the magnifying glass. He frowned and checked the address a third time. There was no doubt about it now. The intended delivery address was 931 North 17th Street. Mandy lived at 931 North 11th. He set the glass down carefully and dropped the envelope onto the table. What a sloppy bunch of pipe-smoking dirtbags, he thought. He cast a look at the clock on the wall. He wanted to tell Mandy, but decided to wait until morning. Not that Mandy would mind being woken up, but he had no idea what her living arrangement in Valley City was all about. Did the guy she was staying with know anything about all of this? A call at 3 a.m. didn't seem like a great idea. He exhaled sharply, studying first the money and then the envelope in front of him. The address written in the corner stared back at him. Wonder who lives at 931 North 17th Street. He picked up a stack of bills. Somebody who's out 50 grand, that's who. The bills felt worn, the edges frayed. These weren't fresh, crisp hundreds from a bank. These bills had been around, passed from hand to hand, stuffed into wallets, envelopes, maybe even duffel bags. They'd probably been snorted through, used in bribes, payoffs, and God knows what kind of laundering operations. The realization of what Alex Schott's last days and minutes might have been like started to sink in. A newspaper delivery guy was a good cover. A kid like that would be useful to druggies and dealers. Doug pictured it like this. Alex slipping into their dingy back room, or maybe a basement or back office, where 2 thugs handed him bulging envelopes of cash or packets of pills. Then he'd roll an envelope into his Morning Herald, slip it into a plastic sleeve, secure it with a rubber band, and out on his normal route, drop it on the porch. Not a bad system at all. Of course, it would all break down if you didn't get the address right. And on this envelope, it really did look like Mandy's address, 931 North 11th Street, so much so that Mandy hadn't noticed, nor Doug, until now. And clearly, Alex Schatz hadn't noticed either. Doug shook his head in disbelief. Alex's mistake was likely just an honest one, an honest mistake that got him killed. Doug pictured the young man again, panicked and pleading for his life, maybe a blade pressed up against his throat. "Where's the money, Alex?" they would have demanded. And in all his terror and desperation, maybe all he managed was, "I fucking delivered it, I swear." Doug frowned. Goddamn morons, probably so stoned out of their minds they didn't have enough brain cells left to figure it out. Chapter 14. Doug leaned back in his chair. Did Alex manage to tell those psychopaths anything before they killed him? Because if he didn't, she might not be on their radar at all. They might not even know she exists. But Alex would have begged for his life, wouldn't he? Doug could almost hear those words echoing through the cold park. Please, please, I'll show you, I'll take you there. Or were they so high and focused on sending a message to other dealers and runners and gophers that they just killed him? This is what happens if you rip us off. The more he thought about it, the less he believed that Mandy might be on anyone's radar at all. If she was, they would have come for it already. Doug scratched and scrubbed the stubble on his cheek, then folded his arms across his chest and leaned back in his chair, staring at the money. I don't think they're coming, he said aloud to himself. Then almost immediately he thought back to the Ford Taurus outside her home and the guy with his goatee, tattoos, and big rings on his fingers. Oh, what do you know, he thought to himself. What do you know about the underworld? Maybe they'll watch your place and move slowly. You're a plumber, you don't know. He recalled now how the man in the Taurus had scanned the yard while tugging on his cigarette. He'd studied the house, the yard, and then the truck with Doug's plumbing across the side. Ah, fuck, Doug said out loud, shaking his head, grimacing. His telephone number was pasted across the side of his truck, right there for anyone to see. Wouldn't be hard to track me down, would it? He stood up rather quickly now, stuffed the cash back in the envelope, then rushed into the garage where he returned it to its hiding place in the boat. Back in the house, he grabbed the blanket and a pillow and the gun from his bedroom. He settled into the living room couch for the remainder of the night, his head facing the front door, the pistol resting in his hand. He hardly slept. At 7 a.m., he brewed a strong pot of coffee and dialed Mandy's number in Valley City. The wrong address? She said, disbelief crackling in her voice. Well, that explains things a little. Jesus. Her questions mirrored his own. Was anyone coming for that money or not? Had Mandy's name and address died with Alex shots, or did the killers know where to find her? The uncertainty of it all gnawed at both of them. I wonder, Mandy said, who lives at 931 North 17th? I was just thinking the same thing, Doug said. I hope to find that out. Just be careful, Dad, she said. Don't do anything stupid. Chapter 15. He didn't know the exact location of 931 North 17th Street, but he had a decent idea. It should be 6 blocks east of Mandy's place. He never got plumbing calls in that area, but he could picture the general neighborhood. He bundled up, tucked the pistol into his jacket pocket, grabbed his keys, and stepped out into the biting morning air. Crossing the interstate, he turned left onto East Divide Avenue. As the truck rumbled along, the street signs ticked by like a mental checklist. 13th Street, 14th Street, 15th. He passed one Ford Taurus, but it was a newer model. No tattooed driver, no rust stains, no putty-putt smoke from the tailpipe. When he reached North 17th Street, he hung a right and began heading south, scanning house numbers as he drove. The signs confirmed his suspicion he was still in the 1600s, too far north. As he continued south, the numbers dropped, 15s, 14, 1300s. The closer he got to his destination, the more the neighborhood transformed. The houses became larger, their lots wider. Snow-covered lawns stretched out like quiet declarations of wealth, framed by iron fences, rock walls, or hedgerows. Doug whistled softly at the sight of stately front doors flanked by columns and sparkling windows. When he reached the 1100 block, Doug took his foot off the gas. North 17th Street dead-ended at the edge of a park. He rolled to a stop at the intersection, frowning as he assessed the layout. He'd need to loop around the park to reach the south end of the street where the house numbers would pick up again. He signaled to turn right. Then his eyes landed on the tall wooden sign just ahead, at the entrance to the park. Lions Park, it read. Doug's breath hitched. This was it, the place where Alex Schatz had been found. For a moment, Doug sat frozen, staring at the sign, the truck's turn signal blinking and clicking away steadily like a heartbeat in the cab. Bare trees framed the park's entrance, their naked branches casting sharp shadows on the snow. He turned off the turn signal, looked both ways, hesitated a moment, then rather timidly, he tapped the accelerator. Doug's plumbing lurched, then slowly moved across East Boulevard Avenue and in to Lyons Park. The tires crunched over the icy blacktop as they traveled along the horseshoe-shaped drive. To his right, the row of picnic shelters came into view, simple, open-sided structures with wooden benches and picnic tables beneath their roofs. Doug's eyes swept over them, scanning their identical outlines until he saw it. A shelter with a mound of flowers piled beside it. He eased the truck into the side of the path, then shifted into park. For a moment, he just sat there, staring. An overhang, a few picnic tables, and a barbecue pit. The kind of place meant for fun summer picnics and birthday gatherings. He killed the engine and got out. His boots crunched in the snow as he approached the shelter. At the pile of candles and flowers, he kneeled down and picked up one of the cards lying there. "Rest in peace, Alex. You didn't deserve this," he said. He placed the card back and stood up, brushing snow from his knee. He turned and studied the long, wide park, his eyes drifting south across an open field. Then he saw it. Not 100 yards away, proud and impossible to miss, the address stared back at him. 931 North 17th. The numbers were huge, etched in tall and elegant lettering on a massive stone wall flanked by wrought iron gates. The estate was sprawling, almost theatrical, with its curved driveway and sprawling windows. And its neighboring homes were almost as grand, each with large driveways and elaborate yards. Whoever lived in those houses could look out through their big bay windows and see the spot where Alex Schatz had been found murdered. They could have seen it happen. Suddenly, Doug's heart jumped. They could be watching me right now. Chapter 16. Doug turned to leave the park but was startled by a voice. "You're early!" A woman in her mid-30s with a notebook in her hand was walking towards him. Behind her, a car and a news van were parked behind Doug's truck. "Early?" Doug managed to say. "For the memorial service," she said, walking up and extending her hand. "Linda Mayer, Biz City News, Channel 13. Doug hesitated, then shook her hand. "Doug Rolfstad," he muttered. "You're not here for the service?" she asked. Doug forced a polite smile. "I didn't know about it, just paying my respects. I've been reading about it in the papers. Terrible thing." Linda nodded, glancing toward the pile of flowers and candles. "Yeah, it's been a tough week, a tough story to cover. Everyone's terrified." "Hey, Gary," she said. A middle-aged man hauling a tripod approached. He gave Doug a polite smile. "What are you thinking, Linda?" Doug stepped back as Gary and Linda began discussing camera angles and the challenges of shooting into the morning light. Doug felt exposed and a little panicky, guilty even. He didn't know why, but he felt like a suspect, like someone who's returned to the scene of a crime. He wanted to slip away, but somehow doing that too quickly made him feel even more guilty. And besides, Linda was walking back in the direction of the cars now, and Doug didn't feel like chatting with her along the walk, so he just stood there, unsure what to do. "You live around here?" It was Gary, the cameraman, setting up his tripod. Doug shook his head. "Gosh, no." He looked towards the large homes to the south. "Can't afford anything around here, that's for sure." Gary snorted, moving the tripod a smidgen. "I hear ya, that's Handshake Row over there." "Handshake Row?" Doug said. Satisfied with his tripod's footing, Gary pulled a pack of cigarettes from his coat pocket. "That's what the reporters call it. Bunch of tight-lipped buggers live there. Councilmen, liquor tycoons, and so on. You know, the ones who always seem to end up on the winning side of a deal, if you ask me. Doug wasn't following and stood there looking at the houses with a confused look on his face. Gary lit his Marlboro, inhaled and blew the silver smoke into the air. "Check it out," he said, walking up next to Doug. He stretched his arm out straight as an arrow and pointed to one of the homes. "That place there, that's Councilman Remick, or whatever his name is. Next to him, Sean Williams Sr. owns half the liquor stores in town." A gust of wind blew smoke into Doug's face. "And what about there?" Doug said, pointing at 931 North 17th Street. "That's Judge Bennett's place." "Judge Bennett," Doug said. He recognized the name, but didn't remember why exactly. "Yep, seems the station's been trying to get to the bottom of some things going on over there, but it's just this tight-lipped, good old boy network and all that. Favors and bribes, my friend." "Alleged bribes." It was Linda returning from the cars. "There's no proof of anything." I know, I'm just the cameraman," Gary said, with a sliver of sarcasm. Then, mostly to Doug, he half whispered, "But seriously, something stinks over there." The three of them stood together, taking in the elaborate architecture. Behind them, more cars were pulling into the park for the memorial ceremony. "We better finish setting up," Linda said. Doug wandered back to his truck. Before pulling away, he took one last glance towards the towering mansion to the south. Well, what a turn of events for the Rolfstads, and perhaps a good reminder of the importance of good penmanship. A smudgy address has suddenly turned everything quite messy for very many people. Tune in next time as we follow the adventures of Mr. Doug Rolfstad. Friday Night Fiction is a work of fiction. Any resemblance to actual persons, living or dead, or actual events is purely coincidental. This story is created and owned by James Wolner 2025, all rights reserved. No part of this story may be reproduced, distributed, or adapted in any form without explicit written permission. Unauthorized use of this material is strictly prohibited and protected under applicable copyright laws. Check out more at dakotaspotlight.com.